Thank you very much. I appreciate you welcoming me here today. Maybe I'll tell you a little bit about me before I start. I'm an Olkola and Djabaguy woman from far North Queensland, but I was born in Melbourne, but this will never be my home. My home is far North Queensland, and when I die, that's where my spirit goes back to. And as we said, I've grandchildren. I had 3 grandsons, so I'm up to 6 now. 6 boys. We've got 1 girl, so we need a girl. We need a girl. And you know, I was thinking, just listening to Caesar there, and I was thinking, wow, what a time to be around Pat Dodson, and what an incredible time. You know, we have been moving towards this for a long, long time. You know, it isn't like this. The treaty stuff has just began. You know, we have been on this journey for a long, long time. And I think it's important that we do consider, you know, a country can't look forward unless they look back and acknowledge what's happened. And Australia hasn't done that. So, you know, if we need to clear the conscience for the next generation, then we need to do something about it. And so I'd like to start today. We humbly and respectfully acknowledge that we are on the lands of the Kulin nations. The Wurundjeri, the Bunurong, the Wathaurong, the Taungurong and the Djabaguy. We pay our respects to and honour the guardianship with which these people cared for God's creation. And they care for it just as much today as they have since time immemorial. Okay, yes. And so these are the language maps. I thought if we're going to talk about treaty, we need to go back. You know, let's go back to where we actually come from. This is Victoria, and these are the 5 language groups within Victoria. Each colour is a different country. Nobody could go on anybody else's land without prior permission or for a proper reason. Within these groups, there are 38 subgroups. Now, I must say to you at the very beginning, I am not an expert. I am not an expert on treaty. I'm not an expert on the Truth Commission. And I can tell you now, you know, there's 38 groups in here. They've all got a different opinion. Nobody agrees with anybody. Not so much. But, you know, often people say, you know, why don't Aboriginal people come together and make a statement? You know, you would never ask Europe to come together and make a statement. Why are we expected to do that? We are all very, very separate. We have very different opinions. We've had very different life experiences. So, you know, we don't all think alike. Now, these are the language groups. You know, so much for a country that was supposed to be terra nullius. You know, look at all those language groups that are still identified today. No, there's not one part of this country that Aboriginal people didn't live. We lived on the coast, in the mountains. We lived in the rainforests, in the deserts. There was not one part of this nation that was not owned by Aboriginal people. That they did not, that, you know, there wasn't one part that didn't belong to anybody. It was all traditionally owned and spiritually owned by those people. And we are the longest continuous culture in the world. Think about that for a minute. The longest continuous culture in the world. That's incredible. No, we're older than the Egyptians. We're old, you know, we were around before the pyramids were even thought of. We were here, living in the moment. We were here when we were all connected. We've survived 3 ice ages in this country. An incredibly adaptive race of people we are. We were here when Tassie was still connected to Australia. We have people alive today who have these stories passed down through their bloodlines of their relatives walking from Victoria to Tasmania. people still alive today that have these stories passed down through their bloodlines of their families walking from Victoria to Tasmania. It's a very long time. Aboriginal Australians coexisted with megafauna for at least 17,000 years. This is science says this, not me. Science says this. Coexisted for 17,000 years with megafauna. Can you imagine a giant kangaroo bigger than this roof? A wombat that's from here to the door? How incredibly frightening. But we survived. You know, they hunted us, we hunted them. We survived and we're still here today. And we very much had the perfect world. You know, we didn't need to put buildings up. We didn't need to have jails. We didn't need to have police. We did all homeschooling. We learned on the land. We had peace and harmony with each other. Our tribes were interconnected so that we didn't have wars with each other. We respected each other. We respected everybody else's country. We all obeyed the laws that were gifted to us by God. The Creator Spirit told us how to live, and we followed those laws for over 50,000 years. We lived in peace and harmony. We never ruined anything. We didn't overhunt. We never destroyed any land. We never killed an animal for the sake of killing it. We only killed them for food. We took care of the land, and we knew that we had to take care of the land for our own survival and for future generations, and we did that. And so a statement of Aboriginal spirituality. Deep down, we Aborigines are a religious people. We did not have any material goods, but we were rich with spiritual goods. It was this strong religious side that made us. It gave us our identity, our dignity, and our self-assurance. And we are the longest continuous culture in the world. We are the First Nations people of Australia. We are the First Nations. So how would you feel if people came to your house and moved in? Imagine how your family, children and grandchildren would feel if they were told they could not come home, and in fact it was not their home anymore. Do you think it would affect them for generations to come? And Kevin Rudd's apology. Today we honour the Indigenous peoples of this land, the oldest continuous cultures in human history. We reflect on their past mistreatment. We reflect in particular on the mistreatment of those who were the stolen generations. This blemished chapter in our nation's history. The time has come for the nation to turn a new page in Australia's history by righting the wrongs of the past and so moving forward with confidence to the future. We apologise for the laws and policies of successive parliaments and governments that have inflicted profound grief, suffering and loss on those, our fellow Australians. And we apologise especially for the removal of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children from their families, communities and their country. For the pain, suffering and hurt of these stolen generations, their descendants and for their families left behind, we say sorry. To the mothers and the fathers, the brothers and the sisters, for the breaking up of families and communities, we say sorry. And for the indignity and degradation thus inflicted on a proud people and a proud culture, we say sorry. We, the Parliament of Australia, respectfully request that this apology be received in the spirit in which it is offered as part of the healing of our nation. This was in 2008. 2008, not much has happened since then. And then we're moving forward to 2017. One of Australia's most experienced Aboriginal singers, songwriters, authors and filmmakers, Richard Franklin, gave a stirring speech about the leadership within Victorian communities on treaties. This is one of the first treaty meetings that the Victorian community had with community to talk about what do we want to do. And he said, although the dominant cultures see Indigenous peoples as victims, problems and alcoholics, he's seen warriors, people running organisations, bringing families together, bringing families home, facilitating our voice in every aspect of society you could imagine. He also spoke about the historic nature of the forum and the treaty process. I think we're going to change the cultural tapestry of this nation for all time. And I think we've begun the process. We're not only changing a nation, we are rebuilding it to suit our cultural shape. What a beautiful vision. Let's rebuild Australian society to something that we can all be proud of. You know, let's have our children learning in schools about Aboriginal people. Let them start learning from kindergarten about the true history of this country. Germany does this very well. It's against the law in Germany to deny that the Holocaust happened. It's certainly not against the law here to say the stolen generation didn't happen. Andrew Bolt does it nearly every week in the newspaper about how it's a lie and it never happened. You know, and it's just, it's more of the not accepting the history of this country. And so the Uluru Statement, this was one of the most important statements that was ever written in Australia. It was the first time Aboriginal people from around the country had come together and given one statement. In 230 years, the first time that Aboriginal people from all corners of this country came together and gave a statement. And this is what they said. We gathered at the 2017 National Constitutional Convention, coming from all points of the southern sky, make this statement from the heart. Our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander tribes were the first sovereign nations of the Australian continent and its adjacent islands, and possessed it under our own laws and customs. This our ancestors did according to the reckoning of our culture from the creation, according to common law from time immemorial, and according to science more than 60,000 years ago. This sovereignty is a spiritual notion, the ancestral tie between the land, or Mother Nature, and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, who were born therefrom, remain attached thereto, and must one day return thither, to be united with our ancestors. This link is the basis of our ownership of the soil, or better, of sovereignty. It has never been ceded or extinguished, and coexists with the sovereignty of the Crown. How can it be otherwise? That people possessed a land for 60 millennia, and this sacred link disappeared from world history in merely the last 200 years? With substantive constitutional change and structural reform, we believe this ancient sovereignty can shine through as a fuller expression of Australia's nationhood. Proportionately, we are the most incarcerated people on the planet. We are not an innately criminal people. Our children are alienated from their families at unprecedented rates. This cannot be because we have no love for them. And our youth languish in detention in obscene numbers. You know, we're 2% of the population here. The kids' jail up the road here in Parkville, we're 30%, 40% of the population. In Northern Territory, we're 99% of the population. In our jails, we're 40% of the population in male and female. So not only our children, but our adults too. Our children should be our hope for the future. These dimensions of our crises tell plainly the structural nature of our problem, and this is the torment of our powerlessness. We seek constitutional reforms to empower our people and take our rightful place in our country. When we have power over our destiny, our children will flourish. They will walk in two worlds, and their culture will be a gift to their country. We call for the establishment of a First Nations voice enshrined in the Constitution. The Makarrata is the culmination of our agenda, the coming together after a struggle. It captures our aspirations for a fair and truthful relationship with the people of Australia and a better future for our children. A better future for our children based on justice and self-determination. We seek a Makarrata Commission to supervise a process of agreement making between governments and First Nations and truth-telling about our history. In 1967 we were counted. In 2017 we seek to be heard. We leave base camp and start our trek across this vast country. And we invite you to walk with us in a movement of the Australian people for a better future. The only thing we asked for was a voice in Parliament. We don't have a voice in our own country. We're the only country in the Commonwealth of 58 countries that does not have a treaty with its First Peoples. We asked for a voice in our own country, and we asked for truth-telling about our history. Our Prime Minister closed it down straight away. And his take on that was they want a third tier of government. Way to frighten the community. You know, nobody in Australia wants another tier of government, particularly not us. You know, we don't want another tier of government. We just want a voice. It's our country. We should have a voice about our future. For too many years, people have been telling us what we need. Listen to what we tell you what we need. We need a voice in our own country, and we need truth-telling about the history. And when we have truth-telling, that will lead to changes. The next generation, I have much, much hope in the next generation. They are so much more global, and they get it. They get it. They understand. You know, I wonder whether we'll get a treaty in my lifetime. So the path to treaty. Victoria is proud to be on the path to negotiating the nation's first treaty with traditional owners and Aboriginal Victorians. This is a significant moment in time and a chance to build new relationships and forge a new shared future for Victoria. So we're the only state that's actually doing something, and we've got a long way to go. We're in a really, really good position because we're able to look at world treaties, and we're able to look and see what's worked and what hasn't. So we can pick what works for us and what doesn't work for us. And so traditional owners and Aboriginal Victorians, and so that means, as I know when it all started, I remember saying, what happens about somebody like me? I was born here. This is the community that I contribute to. Where do I stand in the treaty? Nobody's left behind. And that's what the Treaty Commission says. Nobody's left behind. Everybody, and particularly for our community, because a lot of people don't know where they come from. They don't know who their people are. So they don't have that connection. But, you know, we don't do blood counts here. You know, you're a half, you're a quarter caste. We find that very derogatory because all of our marriage systems were broken down and we didn't have a say in it. And so I think it's lovely that we don't judge people on colour. So Aboriginal, traditional owners and Aboriginal Victorians have long called for a treaty and have made it clear there can be no self-determination without a treaty. Treaty will formally recognise and celebrate traditional owners and Aboriginal Victorians' unique status, rights and culture. And the treaty will benefit all Victorians by fostering shared pride in Aboriginal culture and helping to heal the wounds of the past. And Treaty Act passes through Parliament. The Act becomes the first piece of treaty-related legislation in Australia's history. It sets out a pathway to treaty in Victoria, and this was in 2018. This is something I wrote in 2016. Sherry Balcombe speaks on Treaty with St Vincent's. We have a chance right now to move forward in the right and proper way by working with Aboriginal people towards a common goal of a treaty. Our people have struggled on the fringes of society for far too long. For the first time in this nation's history, Aboriginal people have true hope, a hope that has never been afforded to us before, and emulates our brothers and sisters from around the globe where their countries have heard their cries. We all know in our hearts that a treaty is the right, just and merciful thing to do. It's the right thing to do. We're about to change the tapestry of this nation for all time. And as Aboriginal people, we have started the process. We're not only changing a nation, we are rebuilding it to suit our new diverse cultural shape, something that all Australians can be truly proud of. Australia is the only country in English-speaking New World that does not have a treaties with its First People. We're the only country in the Commonwealth of 58 countries that does not have a treaty with its First Peoples. The USA, Canada, New Zealand and many other countries have treaties with their First Peoples, recognising their rights and prior occupation of their land. We can all be part of this together. Victorian Aboriginal people do not want to be recognised in the Constitution if it is to be more of the same lip service we have endured for decades that changed nothing. You know, and our big thing now, we've put this through Parliament with Labor, and if Liberal gets in, it's straight out. So all the work that's been done over all these years will be out the door. And this is what's been happening to us over the decades. You know, they start talking and, you know, we start getting close and then they move the goalposts. They move the goalposts. And so the First People's Assembly of Victoria is established in 2019, and members of the First Peoples of Victoria are elected to represent Aboriginal people in the development of a framework for a treaty negotiations. And so what we did in the Aboriginal community, we actually had elections. And so we went, we voted for representatives in each area, so the north, the south, the east and the west. And they were all elected by our community. They put themselves up. And then the Yoo-rrook Justice Commission was established on the 14th of May in 2021. So that's only just been established. And that was just because there were Aboriginal people there saying we can't move forward with a treaty until we have a Truth Commission. You know, otherwise you're just covering up the wound and letting it fester. Let's have a Truth Commission. Let's really just say what's happened, admit to it and move on. And so anybody that knew Vicky Clark, yes. Well, this is her cousin, Jason Kelly, who really fought for this, and he's, there's a Wamba, which is spoken in northwest region of Victoria. And the Yoo-rrook Justice Commission is the first truth-telling body to be established in Australia. It is independent of both government and the Assembly. So this won't be part of the Assembly, this will be a separate one, which I think is really important. You know, we need to face up to it so we can move on. And how we got here, the truth-telling is a process of openly sharing historical truths after periods of conflict. Truth-telling acknowledges human violations by promoting the voices of communities who have been victims of these violations. The First People of this country have been calling for truth-telling process for generations. Building on this activism, in June 2020, the Assembly agreed to the truth-telling must be fundamental part of the treaty making and called on the government to establish a formal truth-telling process. The Yoo-rrook Justice Commission was formally established in May 2021 in response to this call. The mandate and form of the Commission were designed by the Assembly and the Government based on consultation with Aboriginal communities across Victoria. A big step, you know, to have the Government to approve that and say, yes, we're going to back this. What will the Yoo-rrook Justice Commission do? Establish an office record of the impact of colonisation on the First Peoples of Victoria using First Peoples stories. This will be done by inquiring into and reporting on historical, systematic injustices perpetrated against First Peoples since colonisation. For example, massacres, wars and genocide, as well as ongoing systematic injustices. For example, over-policing, child protection and welfare matters, health, invasion of privacy and exclusion from economic, social and political life. And so, you know, where do we hear about the frontier wars in Australia? Where are we hearing about what's happened to Aboriginal people? It's not in modern day. How many times I've gone and done talks at secondary schools and I've had students come up crying and saying, I didn't know this happened in our country. Now, it should be something that's taught from the beginning. You shouldn't have a child in, you know, year 9, a 16-year-old saying, I didn't know this happened. And so making detailed recommendations about practical actions and reforms needed in Victoria. The Commission will determine the causes and consequences of systematic injustice and who is responsible. The Commission is expected to make detailed recommendations for changes to laws, policy and education and the types of matters to be included in future treaties. Its first report is expected by June 2022 and the final report by June 2024. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. The next step is currently setting up the process that will guide how it does work, and these will be informed by a report that the Assembly has prepared based on communities' views that the Assembly will provide to the Commission in June 2021. Ensuring the Assembly is culturally robust, culturally safe and driven by cultural protocols. Cultural governance will empower the Assembly's process, governance and membership to ensure that it is culturally robust, culturally safe and driven by cultural protocols of doing business our way. Doing business our way. Sit down and speak to us. Stop telling us what to do. Because that's been the big problem in the past. Everybody knows what's good for us and what we need. We know it's good for us. And I think an absolutely perfect example is the COVID-19. You know, the government said, yeah, you take care of your mob. And our mob stepped in, our health services, and we have not had one COVID in our communities. You know, not anywhere in Australia, and even our remote communities, as soon as they heard about it, they locked everybody out. Some of them even took the elders out bush. But we haven't had it once in our community. And that's because we had self-determination. We knew what we needed and we put it into action. And we've saved our elders. So treaty authority and interim dispute resolution process. The Assembly is establishing treaty authority that is Aboriginal-led, culturally strong and underpinned by principles of Aboriginal self-determination and ensures timely progress towards fair and just treaties by providing effective and independent oversight of the treaty process and negotiating parties. This work includes establishing an interim dispute resolution process that embeds Aboriginal law and ways of doing business and provides a timely, independent, fair and transparent process to solve disputes between the Assembly and the State of Victoria in progressing towards treaty. And setting the rules, the Assembly is building the treaty negotiations and setting the rules for treaty negotiations. And this includes agreeing whether there should be a single statewide treaty, multiple local treaties, or both? What should be included in treaties, and who negotiates and is represented by treaties? The treaty negotiation framework will aim to recognise and address historic and ongoing injustices, support healing and conciliation, and promote the fundamental human rights of Aboriginal people. And so the traditional owners, the traditional custodians of the lands, will be the ones that are making the decisions. They will include everybody, but they will be the main voice that will be listened to, because those Aboriginal people from those traditional areas have been elected by their peers. You know, it's not easy to change a nation, but that's what we're about to do. And, you know, the more supporters we can have, the better. And I think the less traumatic it'll be, the more supporters that we have. And so, look, I just hope that even today has sparked a bit of interest, and that when you see things, particularly around the treaty, keep yourself informed. They've got the Uluru, if you go on Google, Google is magic. There's so much on there, you know, and you can go onto websites, even the Victorian Treaty one, you can sign up to their newsletter so you can keep up to date with what's happening. And I think that's the most important thing. If you can keep educating yourselves, learning, and then telling your friends about it and your families, and, oh, you know, did you know? So thank you everybody for coming today. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.